Hello again, friends. This is Mike, and this is going to be a shorter podcast for Tuesday. And this topic for today is going to be about when does our soul leave our body when we die? And of course, with some near-death experiences, it happens, I guess, we don't die. But when does our soul leave our body? And I'll talk here in a second about why I'm musing upon this today. Stand by. Hello again, friends and fellow truth seekers. Mike Nicholas here with another episode of the Soul Unleashed podcast, where my goal is to help you with the questions you might have regarding the awakening of your soul, and particularly to help other left brain types, like I think I am, to ask the right questions in our search for deeper meaning to life. Ultimately, I want to help you unleash your soul from limiting beliefs and smothering paradigms. So let's get started with today. The topic, again, is when does our soul leave our body? And what made me think about this is I had, of course, over the many years, heard about near-death experiences and what happens when we die and that our spirit, sees things from above. And in a lot of cases, people are being operated on or they pass in an accident. I interviewed a lady recently with an accident, and she was watching from above as things went on. I remember when my grandmother passed, whom I loved dearly, I happened to be visiting her and holding her hand when she died. No one knew that was going to happen at that exact instant. And I was by myself with her at the house. There were a lot of people there, but they had stepped out for a few minutes. I was holding her hand and she passed. And I remember looking up at the ceiling because I had heard that kind of that's what might happen. And this was way back for me in 1982, I think. And maybe 92, and she, I of course I didn't see anything and I didn't sense anything, but even then I believe that there is some kind of something happens when you die. Of course, if you're a religious person, you obviously believe that there's something that happens to our soul when we die. I went to the Bible, for example, and there's obviously a number of references in the Bible that there is something that happens after we pass. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 states that God formed man from dust and breathed life into his nostrils, and that man became a living soul or being when God breathed life into him. And I think that suggests a close connection between the soul and the breath of life or life force that comes from God. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 7 mentions that the body returns to earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it, clearly suggesting that there's some type of return to God or spirit from part of us, our soul part. Jesus on the cross, in Luke 23, verse 46, Jesus says, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," indicating a conscious return of his spirit to God at the moment of his death. So there's plenty of things in the Bible that support something happens when we die. But what this little podcast is about is when does that transition take place? As I mentioned, in near-death experiences, it appears to happen at the moment of death. So these people that report all these near-death experiences, they die on the operating table or as part of an accident or some sort of circumstance. And then suddenly they see themselves from above as people work feverishly on them to bring them back, or to actually bury them in some cases. That is not what I'm concerned about. What I'm thinking about is what happens if we have a violent death. And what got me on this tangent is I was interviewing a wonderful lady, Tammy De Mirza. Her interview is going to be highlighted as part of my podcast this Thursday. But as we were discussing this, the topic was not when our soul leaves our body, but Tammy was using this as an example. And she said, for example, I was watching 9/11, and I saw these people that were falling from the towers, and I could see their souls leaving their bodies. I think there were some 200 people that were forced to either jump or were literally forced out of the tops of the World Trade Towers and fell to their death. And some of those that she was observing on television, she said she could leave their souls leaving their bodies. And that really made me think, because I've always wondered about when that transition takes place, and is there some sense of comfort that relatives can gain from that? Not only 9/11, but our son. When our son died, Matt, he was in a coma for a little over a day, but no one was sure exactly when he went into the coma. We got word that he was found unresponsive, like at 2:00 in the morning at a nursing facility, and then transported to an emergency room. And the people at the nursing facility said he was unresponsive for 20 minutes. The emergency room people said he was unresponsive for 30 minutes. The doctor in the ICU said he was unresponsive for 40 minutes, whatever. They all had a different story, but no one really knew how long our son was unresponsive before they managed to bring him back. And they had him on all kinds of life support things that were keeping him alive. And my wife and I, when we were standing at the foot of his bed, watching him when he was in the coma, we wondered and discussed with each other, was he really there? Was Matt there, whether he had already passed and his soul was already with God? And so it's very personal for me to think about this kind of thing, is when this happens. And when Tammy mentioned that she saw souls leaving the body, I thought it would be nice if, that were the case, that we're spared a punishing, terrible death if we can leave our soul beforehand. Reminded me of a book I read later after Matt passed. I read a book, oddly enough, called Matthew, Tell Me About Heaven. It's a different Matthew, and it's written by a lady named Suzanne Ward. And her son, her Matthew, passed in 1980 in an accident in Panama. And it was a vehicle accident. It was sudden, and she suffered for a long time with the pain of thinking that he had obviously had a lot of pain when he died. And she went to a medium, and the medium told her that her Matthew's soul had left his body right before the actual impact of the vehicle, and so that he suffered no pain. And she was comforted by that. However, years later, she developed her own psychic abilities, or her abilities to communicate with her Matthew anyway, hence the book. And he told her that he had the psychics tell her that had happened because he wanted her to feel better. But in reality, his soul had left the body, but his body still felt the pain. Now, I don't get that. I don't understand what that means. But her Matthew went on to explain why that was the case. He said to her in her discussions with him that our psyche suffers when we die, and depending upon how much suffering our soul goes through when we pass, determines the level of help we need once we go to spirit. And so there's a school or a healing place that we go to when we pass, where our spirit recuperates and gets healed. And in some cases, we don't need much of that if our passing is peaceful or without trauma. But in some cases, it can require a lot of help. And I'm convinced that there is some type of school or healing place that we go to, or life review that we go through, which is part of the healing process. Because when our son passed, Matt, and I was speaking to a number of mediums once I got on the soul and leash journey, and I started investigating those things. One of the mediums told me that our Matt, was in a life review, a healing type of process that he was going through with someone else, and it was necessary for him to go through that process. So, reflecting on that, I can understand and believe that is what might happen when we pass. And it made me think about the most recent thing which was on my mind in terms of people dying horrible deaths. And I thought about the victims of the terrible massacre on October 7th in Israel, where some of those people were forced to not only endure horrible things before they died, but to witness other horrible things before they died. And certainly they were present when that happened, present physically and present spiritually. And so those are the type of horrible deaths where I can understand you pass into the spirit world and your soul needs some type of healing on the other side. And that also makes me less inclined to believe, the concept of judgment as soon as we die. I can't imagine those people that I'm just Joe Mortal, right, thinking these things, but I can't imagine somebody enduring what some of those victims did on October 7th and being tortured and watching others die and suffering horribly, and then going before God, and God, telling them that they missed the Sabbath, or they missed they were treated somebody unkindly, or they committed some type of offense, and he sends them to hell. I can't. I know I'm just immortal, but I can't imagine that being in any way what happened. So I believe there is a place for rest and reflection afterwards and healing afterwards. And that's what got me started on this thinking about when does our soul leave our body. I would imagine for the vast majority of us, it happens at death. And when the physical body stops, the spiritual body leaves. And but are there circumstances, and I believe there are, when God, if you will, intervenes and lets our spirit leave our body before the final impact or the final pain that we suffer when we die. I've done a little bit of research. I'm no expert, so I've been looking the internet and ChatGPT and other places looking to find other people that may have written about this, about when our spirit leaves our body. And I have not found that yet, but when I do, as I continue on this journey, I'll share that with you. But I appreciate you listening for today. And again, my interview with Tammy De Mirza will be released this Thursday. I think you'll find that really interesting. But that wraps up things for today. Thank you for listening. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe or leave a review, that'd be even better. And I only mention that every time because the more reviews and more likes, whatever, it helps other people find this podcast more easily. And that's what I'm hoping to do, is reach more people. Thank you very much, and talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.